Hi guys, this is Andy from Mobile Must Have, and in today's video I'm sitting at my desk and we're going to go through the admin console of the Pepwave. Now this video is going to be targeted for the BR1 and the transit line routers. So that would be your Essentials bundle, your full-time bundle, your Speed Demon bundle, your Ultimate Road Warrior or your Road Warrior bundle. All of those units in those are going to be very similar here. Slightly different, but similar enough where you should be able to follow along. We're going to go through all the main tabs, main places that you should check for settings, and really basically the rule is going to be if I don't touch it in this video, you probably shouldn't be messing with it anyways, because if I don't talk about it, it's just something we don't want to be working with. Now, this is going to be my router. This is the router I've been using for the last year and a half. This is all of my settings and how I've kind of gotten to that. So we're going to walk you through step by step how my router is set up and what is our recommendation for you as well to do that. I'm also going to walk you through when we first get to a campsite, what I do to prioritize and make sure everything is working as I want to when we get there. So we're going to kind of do all of that through this video. So it's going to be long. I've got chapter markers below if you want to skip ahead or skip back to things. Feel free to watch this as many times as you want, but that's kind of going to be the target here. So at this point, let's zoom into the computer and we'll get started. All right, so at this point in the video, we're going to actually start logged in. If you need help logging in, look at the top right of your screen. You'll see a little bubble, and that will help you log in here. Now, with the new firmware of like 8 point something, I don't remember, they did make you change the password to admin the first time you logged in. The first time you log in, it'll be admin, and the password will be admin. But now, as soon as you log in the first time, you're going to have to change that password. This password is only used to get to the screen and log in. So you could put this on a sticky note on the router itself if you wanted to. Not the best security practice, but if you can find it that way, that would work. There is a way, if you're in our service portal, we can go in and change that, but most likely it's a full factory reset if you lose that password. There's no real way to recover it. And one final disclaimer before we get started, the equipment I'm using is the Transit Duo. So this is a dual modem router. It has 4 SIM card slots and has all the bells and whistles. Most of you will probably have a very similar setup, minus the fact that it is a 2 modem. So when we get to that point, I'll explain what the differences are. Almost everything else will be identical. So if you got the full-time bundle or the Speed Demon bundle, you won't see a second modem. You'll only see cellular, and you won't see cellular 1 and cellular 2. Not that big of a difference. I just want to point that out here. If it looks a little different, I'm on the Transit Duo, and yours might be a little different. I'll try and point that out. All right, so this is my current setup, and we are at a campground. We are full-timers, so this is just how we kind of have everything operated. The dashboard is going to tell us the status of things. So I have both modems, because remember I have 2 modems turned on. One is connected to AT&T and one is connected to Verizon. That's perfect. I also am using Wi-Fi as WAN. That means I'm connected to the campground Wi-Fi. I don't have that turned on as a primary because it's pretty bad here. But I do have it turned on for whatever reason, all the cell networks go down. I'm at least going to, back up onto that. And I was testing it too for earlier reasons, so I just have it on. I have nothing in priority 3. I don't have anything plugged into WAN, which we'll go over in a second. And I have Wi-Fi 5 gigahertz turned off because there was no connection there. So these are the kind of the WANs you're going to see. The most of it, you probably are always going to have 4 of these. The minis will not have the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi as WAN. Actually, they won't have any Wi-Fi as WAN unless you've paid the $100 license for Wi-Fi as WAN. Everyone else should have basically the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz there. The WAN port, you may or may not see it. So the WAN port I have turned on for now. That is going to be if you are somewhere that actually provides internet via cable. You can plug an Ethernet into the Pepwave and have a hardwired connection to the Pepwave. So just like you would at a house. Some people are going to be rural home users. You might have a very slow DSL line you want plugged in there and then use cellular again too as a backup. That is what that WAN feature is. So that WAN feature is for a plugged-in cable connection. And I've even heard of some campgrounds have that. So you might want that. That's what it's for. Of course, you've got the two cellular connections. Let's dive into one of the cellular connections and look at some details here. So cellular 1 is going to be, as you can see, I'm connected through LTE. I've got great bars. And if I go over to details, it's going to open up the WAN connection settings. These are all the details about it. Up at the top, you can see I only have one SIM card, and there's no SIM card detected in slot B, but there is one in slot A. And so I can see all of my particular information. One thing you might need is the IMEI. This is a device kind of serial number for the modem. Your carrier might ask for this if you're asking for a new hotspot line or something. They're going to be like, oh, what's your IMEI? This is going to be one of the places you can find it. Everything is pretty much an automatic up at the top. So this is just giving you information about what's connected. You can see I'm using this band 5, and I've got pretty good bars. I'm minus 52. The way bars work, the bars themselves are kind of hard. This RSSI is really what you want to look at for your signal strength. 0 is going to be the best signal strength you can get if like the two antennas were touching. If you have anything over 60, that's pretty good. So I have 50, and so that's going to give me a full bar. So if I had 60, that would be full bars. 70 is going to be 4 bars. 80 is going to be 3 bars. 90 is 2 bars. Anything over 100 is going to be pretty unstable and pretty hard to use. So you might see a cell connection at around 115, 120. After that, they don't even pick up sometimes. And those are going to be pretty unstable and just hard to get some good connections from. So anything over 80 is pretty good. Even sometimes in the 90s range, it will work for you. Tells you your current IP address and a lot of other information there below, even your total uptime. If I continue to scroll down to the WAN connection settings, for the most part, we say leave all of this on automatic. I don't think I've ever made any changes to anything here, so I just leave everything on auto. We might make some changes otherwise, like to DNS stuff later, but I'm not going to do it at this particular source. There are some setting changes you can make in the cellular settings below that though. If you're doing a dual SIM setup, I want to show you that in a second. So I'm going to skip that for right now. We're going to come back to this. There definitely can be some preferences and stuff made here. Now below that section is going to be your signal threshold settings. In this setting, we don't touch it. Like it makes sense sometimes, I think, to move it up, like, oh, I really don't want this one connected unless I have 2 bars or 1 bar. Totally get the logic there. But what happens is a lot of times the cell signal will drop for a second and then come back, whether something drove in between it or a bird flew, who knows, but you'll see just the signal drop real quick. And if you have that set anything above 0, basically the whole router will be like, oh, there's nothing there. It will switch you when really it was just a glimpse in time that the signal kind of fluctuated. So we suggest leaving it 0, and that will greatly help just kind of keep a much more normal overall connection. And if you need to make a change, manually do the change. That's the recommendation there. The last one would be that I want to go over is the health check settings. This is what it uses for failover. The default is typically okay for most people. You can increase it. Let's say you wanted to do 10-second timeouts, and then you wanted to do the health check every 60 minutes or so. I mean, it's kind of aggressive the way it is now because it really wants to make sure you're connected all the time. And so you can back that off a little bit. It really doesn't make a difference. If you're having problems with the router always failing over or always trying to switch, this would be a good place to go in and maybe change those and set those back a bit. But for the most part, I would leave it as is unless you have any particular issues. Now for your cellular settings, you have a couple options here, and this is going to vary based on how you have things set up. If you're going to do failover, or you have a single modem unit, this is going to be your Speed Demons, your Cat 18s, or your MK2s, which are in the full-time bundle. This is probably going to be where you guys are doing your most of your kind of dual SIM work here. I have it set up the same way. So my primary in my slot A is going to be an AT&T card, and then I have a backup 15 gigabyte Verizon plan. I want to get into details later on in those, but that's how this is set up for right now. I, of course, am going to prefer my SIM A to be the one that's used. That is my AT&T unlimited plan, can't go through enough of it. And SIM B is 15 gigs capped, so I really don't want to use that unless I have to. So the settings I'm going to have is both SIMs, and I'm going to prefer SIM A. That's really all the changes you need to make there up in the beginning. Down in the middle section, we'll go through these, but you can basically leave those all to auto unless you're having issues. So for right now, leave those all as auto. And then I turn on bandwidth allowance monitor for both of them. I want to make sure that I'm not going over a terabyte a month on the AT&T plan. This is the mobile must-have one. AT&T themselves get kind of angry if you go over a terabyte. So I want to kind of tell me I'm at 900 if I ever get that high. So you can put in enable. This will turn this whole section on, and then you do it. You can set it up this way. I don't know, the date of yours will have to be the date you guys get billed. So for me, it's the 20th of the month, and I want to cap mine at 900. I want to know when I hit 900 that this gets turned off. Again, you could set it at whatever you want, but this is just kind of how I have mine set up. Same thing for SIM B, except it's going to be lower. I'm actually going to cap this one at 10 gigs because then I know I have 5 I can work with. I can turn this off. I've got those extra 5 gigs I can squeeze out that weren't just eaten up by some update that I didn't even know was going to happen. I can be specific with the last 5 gigs. I even have this one to disconnect once it hits 10 gigs. So it's going to completely turn this off, and I can manually go turn it on when I'm ready for those last final gigs to be used. So that is going to be your bandwidth allowance and how that all works. And basically how we have it set up. If you only have one SIM, just put it on SIM A, keep it simple, and just say SIM A only. And you can still do the bandwidth allowance if you want, but you don't have to worry about preferences, swatching over, and that kind of thing. Now, quick note for people that have a transit duo. Again, if you don't have a transit duo, you can kind of skip this. You skip ahead 20 seconds or so. But the transit duos, you have 2 modems. So you can have one modem running and the second modem on at the same time. In my case, I run an unlimited AT&T and an unlimited Verizon plan, and I have each one in its own modem so they both can be turned on. And that is that's basically why you bought this dual modem setup. So you could have 2 hotspots activated at the same time. If you still wanted to do a failover, you absolutely could. That'd be a third SIM card in, like, let's say slot B, that if AT&T fails, now both can be running Verizon, or however you have that set up. Some people might want to carry around a T-Mobile plan, so if, let's say, AT&T is there and Verizon's failed, but you have AT&T and T-Mobile, your Verizon could have faulted over and gone to T-Mobile. So depending on how you have that set up, it could work that way. Okay, now that we have everybody together, let's talk about the priorities in the WAN settings here. So I have my cellular one is resetting. It's going back to AT&T based on our last example here. But everything in your priority 1 is going to be used for load balancing. So how that works is basically if I connect to the internet first, my connection is going to go, let's say, cell A, for example. Then my wife connects to the internet on her laptop. The Pepwave is going to be like, oh, we're load balancing, so it's going to route it to cell 2. And then if my kid connects, it's going to go back to cell 1, the next connection, cell 2, and every other time something wants the internet, it will basically round robin it to every other one. And that way it is evenly distributing the load. It does not know how much network capacity or speed test is on each one and bounce it out that way. It will just direct traffic to 1, then 2, then 1, then 2, then 1, then 2. Now, if I were to pull priority, my Wi-Fi as WAN into priority 1, I'm adding that into the mix for load balancing. So instead of only having 2 connections, I now have 3. It's going to go, first connection is number 1, second connection is cell 2, and third connection is Wi-Fi as WAN. And then it'll continue to do that. The fourth connection will go back to Wi-Fi or cellular 1, then cellular 2, then Wi-Fi as WAN. So it will load balance based on what is in priority 1. And so just be aware that if you have a slow connection turned on in priority 1, something might get routed to that. For example, here the Wi-Fi is pretty bad. So if I have that turned on, every third connection or so, and you really don't know, there's no way to manage it specifically, every third connection is going to get stuck on that slower connection because it's just load balancing and redirecting traffic. And for that particular reason, that's why I have it turned into priority 2. I still want Wi-Fi as WAN and this campground Wi-Fi being picked up if everything else drops, but I also, I don't want it to be used as like my main primary source of internet here. Now, if I go and drop cellular 1 down to disabled like I just did, it is basically turning it off. So I could move my Wi-Fi as WAN down to disabled, and that will turn that whole system off and won't be connected to anything. I could drop them all down, and it will disconnect it. Now, it won't turn off the Wi-Fi itself. My Wi-Fi will still say full bars connected like it does up in the top of my screen, but there's not going to be any connection to the outside. It's all just going to be my laptop can connect to the Pepwave, but there's no outdoor connection to the outside world of internet because I've disabled all of those WAN sources. Just to cover the rest of it, so you have your LAN interface that tells you your internal IP. You've got your Wi-Fi, which we'll get into in a second since we haven't quite set that up yet. Speed Fusion, I do have enabled for this particular example, but we're not going to cover it right now. That will be done in a later video after all the other videos, and kind of what it is and how that works. You can see I have 2 access points. Most of yours will say 1. I actually do have a AP1 Mini installed, which works fantastically. But again, that will be in another video after all of these other ones. It's an optional. And you can see I've got 20 devices connected. This is a smart house. You can see smart bulbs up here, and I've got another one over there. So we've got quite a few tablets, and I've got kids, so we have a lot of devices connected, and we've never had an issue with 20. I think these support hundreds of devices if you want. So 20 I think is a lot, but you might have less printers and all that kind of stuff. Finally, down at the bottom, you can always watch this to see kind of what your router is doing. So you can see the overall model is a transit. You can see the current build I'm on for my firmware. You can see I have had this particular unit on for 32 days, 4 hours, and 4 minutes. So we don't really do reboots that often. And then it's current, any download or upload overall. And one point, something is definitely syncing or installing, or someone's playing a game, because that's quite a bit of usage for just something stagnant. So if I drag this back up into priority 1, we will see AT&T connects. It does take a minute, but it shouldn't take more than just a thought. And real quick, if you do see obtaining IP address and you get stuck on obtaining IP address, it doesn't come off of that, that's typically going to be a billing problem. So that means I can see full bars of service on whatever card I put in here. I can't see the card yet, but I saw full bars of service. That means the SIM card is working. The SIM card in the Pepwave can see signal. You're all set there. But for some reason, the carrier and the SIM card, their account isn't quite right. So go get that checked out. Checking connectivity. This is all good signs. And then it will get connected in a second. Let's talk about Wi-Fi as WAN. So Wi-Fi as WAN is when you want to connect to a public Wi-Fi source and use that to connect your Pepwave to get internet. So instead of using cellular as your main internet connection source, you're going to be using someone else's Wi-Fi. It's a little confusing because Wi-Fi you are using to connect, like let's say your iPad and stuff, to the Pepwave, but the Pepwave can send and receive signal off of Wi-Fi. Biggest use cases here are going to be campground Wi-Fi or marina Wi-Fi if you're on a boat, or if you're, let's say, mooch stocking, as we call it, in someone's property, you can usually use their Wi-Fi to then bring in internet connection here. This has saved us on a couple of occasions where we're just in a place with no cellular, no matter what type of antennas you had, or we've had great signal and the towers have no data, and now we can just use the campground Wi-Fi to kind of supplement that. So I have all of the Wi-Fi's turned off here. So I've got a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi as WAN option and a 5 gigahertz. I need to connect to the campground Wi-Fi here. So I'm going to do a couple of things. First is I'm actually going to pull this up to enable it. And I typically always turn off the cellulars for this example because it helps me connect directly to the Wi-Fi from the campground, and there's no cellular getting in the way of like, I'm still connected, but I'm not going to. So I find it easier just to turn everything off and then get connected. The next step would be to go to wireless networks. Click on that button. If it doesn't do anything, just give it a couple of seconds. It's still scanning. It's still trying to find what's nearby, and so it might just need a minute or two. It's not an instant thing. But now let's try it again. Boom. So now we can click it. It comes up. I sort it by signal strength. For me, that's easiest. I think that's the best way to find good signal. Off to Neverland is that's my Wi-Fi network, so it's picking that up. And Sun Wi-Fi is the RV. That's where we are. We're at a Sun I don't know, Sun Resorts, whatever they call it. So that would be what I need. So if I'm going to hit connect here, and there's no password to put in. You can see that there is no little lock icon, so there's no password it's going to ask you for, and that's because they do it on a splash page. So I'm going to hit save, and it's going to look like nothing happens. I'm not going to lie. It's going to look like it did nothing. Give it a second. You will see it now has a star next to the Wi-Fi here. I'm going to hit connect again, and you hit OK. And then in a minute or two, we'll let this scan again. You'll see it connect. You might start seeing like a DNS and stuff fail, or you might not see no data through it. In my case, everything looks good. It says connected to Sun Wi-Fi, but nothing's really going to do anything because I haven't gone to that splash page yet. So if I go over here, I just like going to Google and seeing if I get connected. See if it works. Sometimes it sends you right through, sometimes not. But depending on what you need to do there, this is where you're going to go. Try and load Google, try and load Mobile Must-Haves website, try and load a website, and it will throw you into the splash page of that campground. I have seen that sometimes the splash pages are really slow. It's like it's a new computer, it's doing all the IP checks, it doesn't know who it is, so this is usually slow. This is actually slower than normal. But this would be kind of common. At this point, you're just going to, once that splash page loads, you're going to put in your information. Typically, the campground will either give you a password to use or something like that, and then you'll be able to sign in. And then once you're all set up, it will look just like this. It'll say connected to that Wi-Fi source, and you're ready to go. Now, again, in my case, I like this being a backup. So I drag this to priority 2. And then I'm going to drag all my cell phone or my cell networks back up into priority 1. And that will basically be all we need to do to get connected to that Wi-Fi source. And we'll just let that kind of cycle through and we'll be all set there. Next, we're going to talk about the network tab. So I'm going to jump over to the network tab and it's going to do a couple things. You're first going to see a default network. And that's probably all you're going to have. You're not going to have the second one. So on the default network here, you don't really need to make any changes, and I don't typically suggest making any changes here. If you're going to do something like Speed Fusion or other things in the past, you might come in here to make some of those changes. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, just don't touch anything. Everything else you can kind of leave. Now, in the port settings, there might be a setting you want. We talked about the manual LAN port there, how in the Pepwave physically, there's going to be 2 Ethernet spots, a LAN and a WAN port. The LAN would be what you connect a printer to, you connect your laptop to. It is something that is going to use the internet provided by the Pepwave. The WAN port is what's bringing internet into the Pepwave, and then the Pepwave creates internet from that. If you don't ever need the bringing internet into the Pepwave, you can convert that to another LAN port. So you can do that here by basically please click here and it will then do that for you. So now basically both of the ports are LAN ports. Both of them can be plugged into a computer. Both of them can be do that. Make sure you hit save if that's a setting you want to use. And you know what, I have no need for that, so I will do that, and we'll make sure I hit save, and notice it's like that doesn't do anything. You have to hit save changes up here at the top, and that way you can go in and make all the changes you want at one time. You don't have to wait for the router to reboot each time if that change required a reboot, and then you can do one final change and confirm. All settings will be applied, and there'll only be one reboot needed. So if I hit save changes and apply, no reboot was needed, but it's then made the change. You don't typically will ever need a captive portal, but that is if you wanted to have a splash page on your own Wi-Fi that can be done there. That's something we support for supporting you with, but that's something that's there. I'm going to skip the Advanced tab for now. We'll come back to it, and we're going to go to the AP tab. So AP stands for Access Point, and this is where you're controlling your Wi-Fi settings. When you first set up the router, you are going to see the Pepwave dash last 4 digits of your serial number. You can go in there and you can click and you can see all of the default settings there. And I typically recommend don't changing those. If you want to set up your own Wi-Fi network, create a new SSID. SSID is just the Wi-Fi name. Changing the name of a Wi-Fi network can kind of mess up a couple of settings, so go in and just create one from scratch. I'll do it now so it's not hard for you. So we can go in and just call it your new name, so the new Wi-Fi name will be mine. We just say this is always going to be on. You're probably only going to have one option there, so you can just say default, and you can say, yes, we want this to broadcast. Yes, we want it turned on. This is going to be your security settings are where your password is created for the Wi-Fi network. If you know what these are, you can pick the one that you're most comfortable with. I like picking this personal one, the WPA2 personal, and you can then go in and create your own password. My password manager is suggesting one for us. We could just say password. Goes here, and that would be the password then for the network. So when you're going up here and you're connecting to a Wi-Fi network, this is that password that it would be. Something that's easy to remember. I think you guys have done this before on other routers. And then I would leave this as default. I would leave everything else basically as is. There are times where this is going to be changed, but it's more for advanced users, and that's if you're setting up advanced networks. So just leave everything else as it is, and then when you hit save, you will then see your new Wi-Fi name there. I would then go in and delete the original one, the one that says Pepwave and the 4 numbers. You don't need that one anymore. So you can go in and delete it, and you can hit apply changes, and everything will go in. You will probably lose connection to the Wi-Fi at that point, because to get to the router, you were probably connected to the Pepwave system, the Pepwave Wi-Fi there. So at that point, go back in and change it over. There is a lot of other information on the screen if you would like to make any other changes or you're interested. The one I think is interesting would be overall like your info. It will tell you how many devices are connected. Again, if you have a second access point like I do, you can see this is going to be the main Wi-Fi off the roof mount antenna, since that's what I have connected. And then this is the actual AP Mini. And you can tell I've got, right now I have 19 clients already on. Okay, so I have 20 total clients, and I've got one that is connected to the actual Pepwave, and everything else is going to the Mini, which makes sense. The Mini is in the middle of the RV, so that's going to be closer to everything, and it will tell you kind of as things change. It also says that everything for 2.4 and 5 gigahertz is turned on. If you go to settings under AP, the AP tab, and then you go to this, the first one that's going to be there, default, there are a couple settings here that's interesting. You can go in and you can say for each network you've created, what radio do you want turned on? In some cases, it might be better for streaming if you create like your Wi-Fi name 5 gigahertz and only have that running on 5 gigahertz. That might help streaming devices if they're bouncing back between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. If they pick up 5 gigahertz, that's going to be a faster connection, and it's typically the one that those should use for streaming. I would leave them as default unless you're having an issue. And then just so you can reference, these are all the settings. They should all be like this by default. I don't typically recommend any changes here unless you wanted to specify a certain radio not being turned on for a SSID. But that's basically what the settings would be there. So you can make sure you save and hit changes if you're making any changes there, but I'm going to turn that off. The only other thing you could also look at is if you want to know what wireless things are connecting to your network. You can see that here. There's also another place you can see that, and you can see which wireless they're connected to, and then which piece of hardware they are. So that one that was connected to the Pepwave directly, Looks like it's going to be the kids' Nintendo Switch for some reason, and I just found that Wi-Fi to be better than the AP Mini that is literally sitting right next to it, so it might be too close. I don't know. That's kind of funny. All right, so let's keep moving over to the next tab. The next tab is going to be the System tab. This is going to be where you can change your login password, the login password to this IP address. So when you're trying to log into the Pepwave itself to get to this overall console, this is where that password can be changed. You cannot change the admin, the username, but if you wanted to change the password, you can do that here. If you ever run into issues, the first thing we're going to ask you is if the firmware is updated. That you can check here. Now, I'm on the latest firmware because 8.1 just came out at the time of this recording, but you can always go in and check for a new firmware, and it will go out and it'll check, and there's nothing available here. If you can't get online and you had to upload a firmware kind of by USB or something, you can do that. Basically, I'm connected directly to the Pepwave. So I might not have internet on the Pepwave, but I am directly connected to it. So if I was to go to like a coffee shop, download the firmware, save it to my computer, I could then upload the firmware directly to the Pepwave via the Pepwave's Wi-Fi. So there are ways to get around that. If for some reason you can't get the Pepwave online and you're trying to troubleshoot that, that would be a way to do that. If you are having issues, the event log is also a good place that you can look, and it will tell you certain events depending on what settings you have turned on. The main thing here, you might want to do a manual reboot. Sometimes you might be having an issue here and there. If you don't want to go physically unplug the device and plug it back in, you can do the reboot here. You can also see if you are having issues after a firmware update, I can default back to the previous firmware I had installed and then reboot to that firmware. So kind of an advanced feature again, but if you are having issues post a firmware update, you can get to the last one you were running still on this reboot page. For the most part, that's everything I use on this screen. There's not that much overall in the Systems tab I think you should mess with overall. All right, so the last tab over here is going to be Status. This one we also will use for support if for whatever reason you are having an issue. Screenshotting this page is helpful because it has your serial number on it. We can confirm your firmware on it. Two other things on here are important is going to be your diagnostic report. This is basically your check engine light report. And so if you download your diagnostic report and you screenshot us this and send us that, that is helpful for we can help us then figure out what's going on. If you do have to go all the way to a Pepwave support agent, they're going to ask you to turn on remote assistance, and that is here. So that's the status page, the first kind of landing page, and you'll have to turn that on. That is not a please help me tag. That is just a my router and now will allow somebody to remote in. So only do that, I think, when you know you're going to need help, but that's kind of how that works there. If you want to go into these other buttons, you can. It's just going to give you kind of overall information. There are a couple things I use here. The main one is going to be the client list. So this is every device that is connected to my Pepwave. I can sort this by a couple different ways. If I wanted to see, like, if my internet's really slow, I can come in here and I can be like, what is using all of the bandwidth? What is somebody doing? And so right now it looks like Kristen, my wife, her phone is maybe downloading something. Maybe she's watching a show for homeschooling. I don't know. But you can see she's got by far the most usage. This computer is just recording this video, so there's not much it's doing online. I can check the signal strength. Like, you can do a lot. If you can also check the uploads, like what's, so she's definitely doing something. Oh, look at my video, my computer, so you can get a lot of data there. You can also kick people off. So if for some reason something is doing something super strange, you can ban the client, you can tag it certain ways. If you don't recognize a device, be cautious of just booting it off because it could be a printer that's named funny or something like that. But you can definitely ban clients so they can't use up your bandwidth if you don't want them to. You will also see based on the picture if something's currently connected. So the Epson printer, I actually had to go in and rename because it didn't come over correctly. So I was able to name that. And you can see it's actually not online. It shows it was connected, but it's not currently showing that there's connection. And I don't have anything hardwired in. Everything in this house is wireless, except for the AP Mini 1, which is another Wi-Fi source that is connected to the LAN port, and you can see that here. So if you're using a switch or something, it will tell you the hardware ports versus the Wi-Fi connections and so on. The other thing I like is the WAN quality report. You can go in here by particular WAN. So let's do like the AT&T one, and you can see this is my overall signal strength and just generically how well this WAN is performing. Now we were rebooting it a couple times, so I was really not happy with us. But you can see overall it's pretty good. The jumping is expected. It's not ever going to be a totally stable line. The green line on the bottom is just going to kind of be overall. You know, is it good or bad? And I can switch it to Verizon. Verizon might be better. Yeah, so not much better. See, even Verizon's jumping around a bit too. So it's just kind of overall the latency. That's going to be your ping rate. How good is it? Right now, it's fantastic. It was a little sketchy earlier. So you just kind of see that overall report. And then finally would be your usage reports. This is important if you have a limited hotspot plan. Let's say it's 100 gigs or 300 gigs or whatever. You can go in and you can look at in real time, by hour, by day, by month, how much data is being used by particular WAN source. So this is real time across all devices, anything that this Pepwave is doing. I can see what is my aggregate total usage. And so it looks like something is being downloaded overall. 4 megs is quite a lot. I can see what is coming through on cell 1, what is being used on cell 2. So cell 2 is being the main thing using that download. And then I have Wi-Fi as WAN turned on, remember, but it's in priority 2, so it's not being used. So we're not going to see any traffic there. I kind of like that, especially if the network seems slow. I can kind of track down what is happening and what is going on. From a monthly standpoint, I can then get an overview of what's going on, how much data am I using. I am considered a power user. So these numbers are going to probably be much higher than yours. I'm making all these videos for Mobile Must Have and for my own channel, and I'm doing a lot of video files being uploaded and downloaded. So we've got a lot going on that I think is more abnormal. You can see for the month of September, we downloaded 555 gigs. We uploaded a terabyte, again, across multiple plans. I wouldn't do that on one. And so our total overall usage was 1.6. That is really high. And you can see we're much, much lower than that going into kind of the 20th of October. We won't be anywhere close to that. If you want to sort it by particular SIM, you can do that too. So here's all my usage on that AT&T Unlimited plan. Here is my usage on the Verizon Unlimited plan. So you can kind of see and track your usage that way, or get a good idea of how much usage you overall are using. That is, oh, now I did say we'd go back to the network. I said we'd go back to the advanced tab. There are 3 main things I want to talk about on this one. Speed Fusion is actually going to be your landing page, but not the main topic for this particular video. I do want to talk about user groups, and more specifically, bandwidth control. Something I recommend setting up is going to be individual bandwidth limits. What that's going to do is that is going to say no computer, no device on my network gets to use more than 8 megabits per second at a time for upload and download. For a cellular connection, 8 megabits is probably going to be a cap per device anyways. You're just not going to get much more speeds than that. This is more than enough to do Zoom calls and team calls, video calling of whatever sorts, uploading YouTube videos. It's a pretty good cap, and the reason I like capping it is actually more for streaming. If you just let Netflix stream at whatever it wants, it could start streaming at like 8K, which just is unnecessary. So I like having a small cap, so that way none of my unlimited plans get eaten up right away. I think when Disney Plus first launched, we watched one video that took up 14 gigs on Verizon. So that 15 gigabyte Verizon plan, done. One video, one night. And that's because none of this was set up correctly. So I recommend doing that. If you're going to do a guest network, you can do something like a 1 and a 500 or a 3 and a 1, whatever you want to set up there. That way they still have internet. It's just going to be quite a bit slower. The other thing I think is really important is the application priorities. Basically what this is this will prioritize certain network traffic over others. I work full-time from here, as you guys have all seen. The kids do school also in the other room. So if I'm in a meeting, I'm doing a video call with work, I'm going to prioritize that over them streaming something on YouTube or Netflix. So the best way to go in here and do that is to basically say add category, and the category added was all supported via voice over IP protocols. That's Zoom, Teams, I think those are the most popular ones now, WebEx, whatever you guys are using. And I said that is the high priority. Like that is going to be picked over somebody streaming something else. Sometimes you might want to go in and add audio video streaming. If there's only 2 of you, that is actually a good thing to add secondary, because it will pick that over a computer doing an update or something else. So that's not a bad thing to prioritize if you want. You can also prioritize specific things if you wanted to do just a specific Netflix, or I don't think they have Disney Plus on here yet. That might be the next firmware. But something like that, you can go in and pick a particular application. You can also pick a particular application to deprioritize if you wanted to do that. Like if you wanted to, let's say we don't want to ever have Netflix be prioritized. Sorry if I can do my alphabet. You can go in here and say low. So that will always be deprioritized over everything else. Not a bad idea for software updates or stuff like that, depending on what you want to do. And then finally, I've done this also since I have kids, is content blocking. So content blocking, I've gone in and I have a preteen, so I've gone in and made sure a couple of things aren't available. You can do other things too, like blocking particular programs, blocking particular games. Like you can turn off, I think, all of like Xbox if you don't want that working for some reason. You can go in and do other things around content blocking if you want. I just wanted to give kind of a quick overview here. And look, you can even exempt certain users. So we could say all of this stuff is blocked except for your user groups. Again, a little bit more advanced, but something I think that's pretty quick to set up that might be helpful depending on your use case there. Okay, at this point, that's the video. That is all we've got for our main setup of the Pepwave system. We've gone through all the major tabs. We've set up our Wi-Fi networks. We've done all particular little changes here and there and that kind of thing. So I'll see you guys in the next video.